Good morning, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. I know we've had more or less a break between interviews, but we're back in the fold again. And I present to you a very special guest this morning. Her name is Dr. Carol Swain, and she is the author of several books. Black Eye for America. We're going to discuss one book in particular today entitled Diversity of Diversity, how real unity training can promote healing in a post-affirmative action world. And there's also a book that kind of catapulted her publication career, and I recommend my audience look into this book. It's entitled Black Faces, Black Interest, the Representation of African Americans in Congress, which was actually initially a dissertation she turned into a book. And I just have a lot of questions today. This is going to be a great ideologically diverse conversation because there have been some complaints about, Kiko, do you have any conservative minded people on the show? And so I'm like, sure, I've tried to get people conservative minded on. And, for whatever reason, people don't come on the show. They do come on the show and then they pull out the last second. But I'm really excited to talk to Dr. Swain this morning. And I just want to say welcome to the show. I can't wait to enjoy this conversation with you. This is episode 123 on Kiko's Freethinkers Forum.
Well, thank you so much. And the title of the book that you read, we changed the subtitle because it was confusing people. And the new subtitle is How the Supreme Court's Decision to Remove Race from College Admissions Criteria Will Doom Diversity Programs.
Oh, yes.
And I would argue that what we see taking place across the country is evidence of that. And I would also say that this book, like a lot of my work, was kind of ahead of its time in that when it came out summer of 2022, right? Or was it summer of 2023 when it was last year? Most Americans didn't know what is DEI. I don't think they knew. But then we have had a baptismal in fire about DEI. I think most people have some vague understanding of what it is.
And it's funny that you say that. I cannot believe the coolest thing about these interviews is that a lot of times the guests and I, it's almost like we're thinking on the same page about something to save wavelength in the brain, because that's one of my initial questions. I like to establish these terminologies with the broader audience because we have a lot of people who don't have like formal education. We have people, different backgrounds, international. 43% of the audience is internationally based. And so I think it's important to kind of establish these terminologies. But I wanted to get a definition, a Carol Swain definition of DEI, which you explained in the book. And I want you to differentiate that from what people associate with the word affirmative action.
Right. I would argue that DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, is a first cousin of critical race theory. And it doesn't mean the same kind of diversity that Americans sought and welcomed after the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Back then, diversity meant that recruiters went into neighborhoods, they went to schools, colleges, and various places to look for underrepresented minorities, and they were always seeking the best and the brightest, or at least that's what they said, they were seeking the best and the brightest. And so people were made aware of opportunities that they may not have been aware of, or they may have been shut out of. So diversity meant casting a wider net. I would argue that it was not about dramatically lowering standards, even though there was remedial assistance. Like when I went to college, I started at a community college. I took remedial math. That's the only one I remember having to take, was the remedial math. And there was a pursuit of equal opportunity. And when I think about equal opportunity and equity, I would argue that they're not the same. That equity seems to ensure or seeks to ensure equal outcomes, a proportional representation, that you're going to bring in people because of their group membership or their historical background, if they've been victims of discrimination. Equal opportunity meant that people like me got their foot in the door, but you had to prove yourself. And so many people fell, that, they fell out of the educational system, or they may not have been able to compete. But even for someone like me, and it's important for your audience to know that I came from poverty, that I was one of 12 children born and raised in rural poverty, dropped out of school after the 8th grade, married at age 16, and ended up getting a high school equivalency, a GED, going to a community college and getting the first of 5 college and university degrees. And even though my background was not the same as the other students, I had to do the work, which meant at the community college, I did the remedial math. And I had wanted to major in art, but I was talked into majoring in something more substantive by an advisor who told me that that was not a good career option. So I ended up choosing business. Even though I didn't really have the background, I had to do the remedial math to get my 2-year degree in business. And I got that 2-year degree in business in 2 years. And I made the dean's list a couple of times.
Thanks so much for that.
Oh, I didn't finish the inclusion part. I'm sorry.
No,
You
keep
asked me
going.
about DEI, and then I will frequently go down rabbit trails. So you have to sort of steer me to
Oh, you're
that.
good. You're good.
But inclusion is not the same as integration. Like in my era, we saw integration. That meant, you use your diversity, your outreach to groups, and you brought them into a particular setting. You brought them into a job. You brought them on the team. You wanted an integrated workforce. And so integration, diversity, very similar meaning. Inclusion means that you bring in people from particular groups, and it seems to be an emphasis on them maintaining their group identity. And so you have these affinity groups where people are not necessarily feeling like they have to become part of the team, or they want to be part of the team. It's almost like they have to be, discreet. And also, back in my day, we talked about America. Was it a melting pot or a salad bowl? And, with the salad bowl, you have all these different parts of vegetables, and they maintain that character, and they just chopped up. The melting pot, everyone blends together. And so that was rejected. And so with inclusion, you find people more like they don't want to blend in. They just want to do their own thing. That's not so great when it's a workplace.
Interesting. And so going to the affirmative action part, you mentioned in the book, I guess my question would be, since I've read the book and a lot of my audience may not have read the book, The Adversity of Diversity, would you say that you benefited from affirmative action?
Well, I
And
actually have
because I know
a
you make
chapter.
references to that in the book.
I have a whole chapter on affirmative action. Let me see what I titled that chapter. Um, Carol's educational journey in an affirmative action world. And I was born in 1954. That was the year of the Brown v. Board of Education school desegregation case. In Virginia, they did not desegregate until probably 1968. And the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, sex, color, national origin, and religion. And I certainly benefited from the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as did white people. White women benefited because they were protected, and white men benefited because jobs were advertised nationally. And before the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it was the old boys or old girls network, or someone picked up the phone. They said, do you know somebody? We're hiring. So they called people they knew. Once the law changed, they had to advertise their jobs. So that created opportunities for a lot of people. And I would argue that I benefited from non-discrimination, outreach, and equal opportunity. And, like I worked, my butt off. And at the community college, I started as a work study student. I ended up being hired for a full-time position, nights and weekends. And I went to school full time, and I graduated magna cum laude. And it took hard work and a lot of focus. But so did I benefit from affirmative action? I benefited from being a minority that defied the stereotypes. Like if you defy the stereotype, then you're going to stand apart. And if you're a young person and you have your pants halfway down, your underwear showing, and maybe there's nothing wrong with you choose your own hairstyle, but I guarantee you the people that get promoted and go the furthest are the ones that have traditional hairstyles. One of my sons has always worn his hair short, and his son, my grandson, who is 23 years old, has never had long hair. He calls himself a nerd and he wears glasses. I'm afraid that, that that sometimes people will look at you, and if you look like you came from the ghetto, and that's a stereotype, and it might be wrong, but you're not going to benefit the same. And I think I benefited from the fact that when I was on a job or when I was in an environment, I looked to people who were successful. I was watching them. What are they doing? I wanted to know what they were doing. And I got advice from those people, and I emulated those people. And some people in your audience may say that I acted white. I don't know, but I got myself out of poverty. And so did I benefit from affirmative action? I benefited from a world that was looking for talented minorities.
Well, you brought up something there. The thing about being a Black American is not even just this whole moniker of acting white. I've gotten it. I know you've gotten it. And those personal moments in the book are kind of what resonated with me, honestly. I came away from this book. I think I agreed way more with you than I thought that I anticipate the book like a lot of pushback, I guess, like in my mind, like, okay, I'm not gonna
like to fight
about this. But when I finished the book, I was like, I actually agree with most of what she's saying. Like, and as a Black person myself, you get just for being in school and being interested in stuff, people would say, like, oh, why you been such a nerd? Or they say stuff like, you made a reference about higher education. Oh, you're a Black woman. You're going to be totally fine. You're going to be able to get a job. I got the same talk when I got into my PhD program at UT.
And isn't that insulting? It is totally insulting. But
Absolutely.
then, I mean, I'm going to refer to Claudine Gay, the former president of Harvard University. Like, she came on the scene while I was on the faculty at Princeton. And all I could hear about was this brilliant Black student at Harvard. And so she had the descriptor in front of her as brilliant. And so when you have people like that they decide, maybe they decide who's going to be successful and who isn't, but they labeled her as brilliant. And I think that hurt her because they did not look closely at her work. And then we know 3/4 of it was plagiarized, whereas the rest of us, worked our butts off. And I don't know about you, but whenever I was writing something, I live in a kind of terror that I might accidentally forget to quote something. I might accidentally miss a footnote. But the whole idea that you would copy passages of people's work and pass it off as your own, that was unthinkable.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate. That's the worst thing you can do in academia, really.
And they drill it into you. Even in grad school, people get that. And so when I think about Claudine Gay, I have a mixed feeling. But one of the things is she went to Phillips Exeter Academy. That's the best education you can get in America for her high school. She went to Stanford and Princeton for undergraduate, went to Harvard for her graduate school. That's the best education America has to offer. And she comes from a wealthy family. And she pretty much totally got a free pass because she's still making almost $1 million a year, blaming racism for the criticisms of her.
And for my audience who may not know this person, can you kind of give like a little background into this person that you're referring to? Because I don't think I don't even know if I'm aware of this person.
Well, in December of 2023, the story broke that the Harvard University's first ever Black president, Claudine Gay, this woman, had was guilty of plagiarism. And it was more complicated because she had been all over the news because she was one of 3 university professors that testified before Congress about antisemitism on that campus, what was happening to Jewish students. And she gave an answer that people were not satisfied with, because when they asked her if calling pretty much for the death of Jews would violate Harvard's rules of conduct, she said it depends on the context. And so even though the Representative Elise Stefanik had grilled the other 2 college presidents, they immediately pivoted. It's my understanding that all 3 of those professors were coached by the same lawyer. So before you go before Congress, a lot of times you have lawyers, they tell you what to say. They had talking points, but when you have talking points, you got to also use your brain. And if someone is throwing a question at you and it doesn't quite fit the talking points, you need to know how to pivot. She didn't pivot. And so, but then it turned out that for months, there had maybe years, there have been rumors that she was a plagiarist. People dug deeply into her writings, and they used AI in some cases, and they found out that 3/4 of her research that she presented to get tenure, and she presented, to rise to become the president of Harvard University, was plagiarized. And my problem with her is that her dissertation and her early work was based on ideas from my first book, Black Faces, Black Interests, the Representation of African Americans in Congress, which won 3 national prizes, was cited by the Supreme Court, and Library Choice Journal listed it as one of the outstanding books of 1994. She used my work without adequately citing it. And in some places, there are at least 5 passages where she didn't use quotation marks or citations. So I'm actually pursuing a legal case against Claudine and Harvard because no one wanted to engage in negotiations. So there will be a lawsuit.
Wow. Yes, I definitely have to. And I'll be honest with you, Carol. A lot of this stuff with like the campus protests and stuff. I have views about like the overall, just like what's going on in Palestine and Israel, but I've been so disconnected from the news cycle. Like I couldn't tell you one detail, like major detail about what's going on with
I
those
have to
protests.
follow it. And it's sort of like the George Floyd protests. They're very, very organized all across the campuses. And it's really disrupted the lives of students that are in college to get an education. This graduating class of 2024, many of them missed their high school graduations because of COVID. And so they were, for the first time, they were going to have an opportunity to walk across the stage and be handed a piece of paper for their achievement. And a number of colleges canceled their graduation. So not only did they not get a high school graduation, they didn't get a college graduation. Unless they're going to graduate school, they got cheated out of, I would say, out of 2 graduations.
Yes. It's interesting that you say that about you made the comparison to George Floyd, because I've argued this too, and my audience, some of my audience members are probably going to not feel what I'm saying when it comes to that. But I just think it's odd that it's an election year and Palestine seems to be like the new Black Lives Matter question of 2020 in the summer. To me, that's what it seems like.
Right. It's organized, and it's to get people riled up so that they'll vote. And what is very troubling to me is how progressives, and when we say progressives, we usually, it's euphemism for Democrats, some of them, but they manipulate people of color to try to get them out to vote. But when they're actually governing, they don't show them much regard. And I believe one reason why Donald J. Trump is picking up so much Black support is that Black people are realizing that the Democrats prefer the new immigrants over them, because it's all about the votes, and they're the fastest growing group. So many Black babies, I'm really going to blow up your podcast, but I'm going to say so many Black babies have been aborted. So Black people's population is not growing at all, but the immigrants are fast growing. Democrats are looking down the road. They are trying to find a way to get new voters. And so they don't need Black people anymore. They don't care about Black people, and Black people are feeling the pain. And that's why they are, some of them are turning to Republicans, where for now they're feeling the love.
I tell you what, as far as the way I'm kind of operating at this point, because I used to be a Democrat like yourself. But after Obama's second term, that's when I started to really change and get away from the two-party system. I think from the vantage point here at Kiko's Freethinkers Forum, I think a lot of the Trump's momentum with Blacks, especially, there's always been an undertone with him, especially because he was always kind of connected with pop culture. I think so many hip hop artists had referenced Donald Trump in their songs at one point. So he was already known in the public eye. He was a Democrat himself. The thing about it, all these people at one point were on one side of the team or the other, the blue or the red
Right.
side. I see it as more a function of the two-party system that's destroying America personally. I think when you're whether you're on the Democratic side or the Republican side, a change to you means simply going to the other side, but you only have two options.
Well,
And
there is a problem, and the elites look after the elites, but the American people across race, and I believe across party, I'm talking about regular people, not the elites. I think we agree on just about everything. And when you say that my book is something that speaks to you and resonates with you, one thing I can guarantee you is that I care about America. I care about all people, and I'm trying to find solutions. I've always been a person that's trying to find solutions. And so that's how I have approached all my writings. And some of my books will have discussion questions and, points to think about, or action points, because I felt like often you watch the news and you get all worked up emotionally and you don't know what to do. And so I thought that it would be useful to suggest to people some things they could do that would be constructive.
I think where I definitely understand where you're coming from, like being kind of divorced from the liberal mindset. Like I consider myself a leftist, but I'm not. But that's where I have a big problem with the book. My biggest critique of the book is like the wordsmithing. It seems like Democrat is synonymous with Marxism,
It
and
is.
but
I stand on that.
but Marxists, but like actual Marxists that I talk to wouldn't want to have anything to do with the Democratic Party or the Democrats. Like now that are basically they've doubled down everything on identity politics, which is
They
something
should, that's a part of the Marxism. And I would there's some things that I would like for you to read about communism. And there's a book called The Naked Communist that was published in 1958 by a guy named Cleon Skousen. And in it, he had 45 current communist goals. They were read into the congressional record in 1963. And when you read those 45 goals, almost all of them have been attained. One of the goals was to take over one or more of the political parties. I argue that they've taken over the Democrats and they're working on the Republicans. It was to take over the churches and push the social gospel, like good works, as opposed to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it talked about pushing homosexuality as normal and natural. It talked about making schools transmission belts for socialism. It talked about normalizing relationships with communist China. Richard Nixon did all of that. It's Democrats and Republicans that have worked, but I believe that those 45 goals have been making pornography readily available and natural. Uh, all of those things came from Marxists, as well as this cancel culture. If you read Herbert Marcuse, his 1965 essay, Repressive Tolerance, he talked about a coalition of minorities shutting down the traditional voices and unleashing the new voices. And he argued that with the traditional voices, of course, they could believe in the Constitution and free speech because they had all the power. But that once power was seized, that they needed to be shut down. And I would argue that I myself was on the cutting edge of being canceled even before we knew what was happening. There were about 5 conservative university professors. We were all targeted at the same time.
Mm. When was
But
this
I,
time
but I,
period?
but I do feel that the Democratic Party is not the Democratic Party of my youth, or when I was in college, or when I wrote Black Faces, Black Interests, because I traveled around with white and Black members of Congress, Democrats. I didn't travel around with any Republicans because I had a certain criteria to select the districts. So it was based on the racial composition of the district and the race of the representative. And there were pro-life Democrats. There were the white Democrats that represented majority Black areas or areas that were becoming majority Black. They always had a Black legislative assistant, majority Black staff. They had mobile offices or their offices in minority communities. And so they were trying very hard to represent Black interests based on the way Black people saw their interests. But even back then, Republicans like Strom Thurmond and
Jesse Helms.
Yeah, from years ago, North Carolina, they had Black support too, because people would say that if you call their office for a constituency problem, they get it done right away, that they were very responsive. And so there were Black people that supported them and said they were more responsive than the Democrats. So that, is part of the reality that the Democratic Party today is not the same Democratic Party that I knew in my youth. In fact, I worked on campaigns when I was at the University of North Carolina, Democrat campaigns, and I didn't leave the Democratic Party until 2009. I became an independent first.
Mm-hmm. I guess I think that's where we would just have to agree to disagree, because again, I don't claim to be a Marxist personally. I'm still trying to delve and understand, just because I have a lot of people on here that they come on, they identify as
If you're a
Marxist.
Marxist, you wouldn't be talking to me. They don't do that. They don't want to do that
Oh my
because they
gosh.
had the weaker argument, and they don't want to debate, and so they don't want to do that. And I don't understand, for conservatives, a lot of them don't want to take the phone calls of the New York Times or Washington Post because the people are trying to set you up, or they're trying to set up usually they are, but I'll take their calls. And I feel like that by taking their calls and engaging them, I may be confounding them. At least they'll learn that the world is not quite as simple as they think it is. Mm-hmm. But I definitely will take their calls. And I'll go on any program. I'll go on CNN or anyone that calls me. But mostly I find with today's progressives, they don't want conservative voices because it triggers their audience. Mm-hmm. And that triggers the host.
But see, that's the thing about it. This is like an independent platform, but I totally get what you're saying. But I think that that's more, again, operating within like the two-party system mindset. But because personally, the more I look at it, it's almost like conservatives and liberals are so much more alike than they are different. And it's basically
conservatives and liberals.
It's like the goal is to basically take down the other side's arguments and not actually engage in substantive conversation.
Well, I mean, there are very few people, I think, that actually understand how to operate. The Congress has become about the members themselves, and it's a good, cushy job for them. And there are very few that are actually leading of both parties. And George Wallace, you know, he was a segregationist back in the 1960s, and then he got shot, and he had a Christian conversion experience and did a lot for Blacks before he died. But he famously said that there wasn't a dime's worth of difference between the two political parties. And I think he got it right.
I agree too, but that's kind of where it doesn't make sense. The use of like Marxism and stuff, because first of all, we would have to define what that is and stuff, but wouldn't that
We can
imply?
define what it is. But it won't. We don't want to use our time here
Yeah,
doing it.
no doubt
But
about it.
I
No,
can
I
tell you
definitely.
that the Democratic Party has been taken over by extreme Marxists, and it's not a very comfortable place for regular people, I think, of any race, because it's so misguided, and I think it serves the interests of the very elite, but not the working men and women.
Okay.
And it used to be the Democratic Party had the stereotype of being the party for the working man, and they accused the Republicans of being the party for the rich and the party for the elites, and it's like they have totally flipped on that. And I don't know if you saw the Wall Street Journal article saying that the reason Biden is losing Black support is he hasn't talked enough about climate change. And did you see that?
No, I haven't. I
You
don't
need to
follow.
read it, but I thought it was hilarious. I mean, I went to the grocery store and they had bags of groceries that maybe a year ago, even they were $3 for vegetables, frozen vegetables. They were $8 on sale for $7. And I can afford to pay $7 for a bag of veggies, but I would not pay $7 for a bag of veggies. So I left them, I left them in the store. And I see these exorbitant prices, and most people I mean, they would have to be making hard choices about what to eat, like bread and just things. Organic eggs, you know, $10. Sometimes regular eggs might be $4.99. That's a lot of money for an egg.
Yes. The comment you made, I would simply just conclude it this way. I've always told my audience, because we operate outside of the two parties, we see it as a one-party state. The Democrats used to be more of a labor party. Now both parties are completely corporate. That's to me where they're.
That might be part of it.
What's that?
That may be part of it. All I know is that the rest of us, I mean, they pretty much we're left behind. I do try to use my platform to be a voice for all Americans, and I believe in the Constitution and would want the best for America because that's all we have, pretty much. But I
Yes,
worry about what it doesn't matter whether Democrats sometimes or Republicans are in charge. There are things that take place that I would not think would be in the interests of America as a whole.
and and I can definitely get on board with that message. And that's what I'm saying. It's like I think the labels and stuff are kind of there to like keep people kind of in their zone. But if you really look at it, it's almost a distraction for like things that are going.
It's done on purpose. It's done on purpose. And if we could get beyond that, but I'm not going to finish, this podcast without talking about faith. And I don't think I talk about it in my book, but for myself, I had a Christian conversion experience in my 40s, and that out of that, I was delivered of shyness because there was a time I was so shy that I turned down an opportunity to be on Good Morning America, and I could not do the speaking all over the country and sometimes other parts of the world if I were shy or if I were afraid to get on an airline plane. And I believe that God has called me, that He has given me a message. And when I write books or when I post something on social media, I mean, I joke sometimes. I like to have fun sometimes, but mostly it's because I care and I'm really trying to alert people. And I have, for an old lady, I have a pretty good memory that I can remember things to make connections. And people, oh, I forgot that. But the other people will say they forgot that, but I can see something taking place and it reminds me, oh, this is a version of something that happened at such and such a time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like social media and using the platforms. And I like books as a way to communicate. And you mentioned about my book being short. It is short because people don't have a lot of time. And it's also an audio version, so people can listen to it
Mm-hmm.
if they don't like to read. A lot of us have commutes.
Yes. One thing I thought about when you used the book, you mentioned CRT, and I know CRT wasn't the focus of the book, but I thought it was interesting. I think that you use CRT, which is not a bad thing, like this component of it. I would argue that you use basically the positionality component of CRT, which is basically simply saying that a person's position in the world guides them as far as based on their experiences, their position in the world. In your case, being a Black woman coming from poverty. In my case, it may be a Black man come from a certain type of family. It incorporates social class, different dynamics, not just a racial thing.
I know all about critical race theory was developed uh, in the 1970s, Derek Bell and Richard
Mhm.
Delgado. And it is a racial theory that's morphed into DEI. And I have a whole book on it, Black Eye for America, How
Uh-huh.
Critical Race Theory is Burning Down the House. Have you read that book?
No, I've only seen parts of it in
Well, I'm going to
preparation for this
send you some
interview.
books.
No,
I'm
no, that's totally fine. But I guess the point I was making is that as a literary scholar, I used critical race theory without even knowing what it was to simply argue the characters in the fictional novels that I worked with in Latin America, the Black
right.
men, basically using a social class. In other words, it's not just a racial thing. You can't just look at it from a
Yeah, you're
racial.
right. I mean, they theories that have some truth in it. They borrow from different things. And so clearly, being a Black woman from poverty, that another thing that distinguishes me from most academics is that before I started college, I worked in nursing homes, I worked in a garment factory, I sold things from door to door. I've been a sales clerk and had that experience when the weather is beautiful, like it is right now in Tennessee. I'm working. I go in and it's beautiful, and when I come out in the evening, it's dark, and that's not a good feeling if you're a sales clerk, and you're missing the beauty of the spring or whatever. So I can relate to regular people, but I also can relate to white people, and I can relate to poor white men from Appalachia, like J.D. Vance's families, because when I was working those dead end jobs where if you got a 10 cent an hour or 25 cent an hour raise, you got excited over 25 cents. I
Mhm.
experienced that. And those white people that I worked with, they were poor like me, and we all wanted better for our children. We shared that. And I don't think they should be discriminated against because of the color of their skin. I also don't believe that all Black people are victims and all white people are oppressors. I think that that is nonsense. And that if we went back to some of the values that I grew up with or other generations of Blacks grew up with, you'd have more success because we were not raised to blame other people. We were told we had to work hard. We were told that we had to be better. And we just did what we had to do. We made it happen. And if you go back to Bob Woodson, who at the Woodson Center, he's 86 years old. He's been fighting in the trenches for many generations. In Bob Woodson's era, Black men dressed up, they wore hats, they worked harder than everyone else, and there was no affirmative action. They succeeded, they became very successful. And back in the 1950s, Black people loved the civil service exam. And that's why you have a large Black middle class in DC, because with the civil service exam, the person who had the highest score got the job. So you knew what you had to do. You had to have the highest score and you were going to get hired by the federal government. They didn't have a problem with it. And the civil rights movement itself wasn't about lowering standards. It wasn't about saying math was racist. It was about ending discrimination. People did not push for affirmative action. Affirmative action came from white elites, white male elites.
Mm-hmm.
That's its own story. But part of it is a racism that underscores affirmative action because there's an assumption that racial and ethnic minorities can't compete. Like no matter how hard they work, they just can't cut it. So you got to lower the standards for them. And it has gotten to be absurd. I believe the state is Illinois, but I was told recently that a particular state had passed the requirements had lowered the requirements for the bar exam for Black people.
Mm.
And we know with Boston, I think a children's hospital, they decided that they were going to stop reporting crack babies that are born in the hospital because they said it discriminated against Black people, which meant they sent little babies home with crackheads. I mean, this is crazy.
Wow. As far as my comment with when you use vantage point in your book,
I use what vantage point?
Yeah, I was only making the point when you used the word vantage point that it was simply, to me, you could use that as like, and you kind of clarified it in the book, like basically your position as a person that has such and such experiences. And I was only making the point that to me, I see that as positionality, which is a part of CRT, but I used it from a literary standpoint when I do that in my research, and was simply saying I basically did that with the characters in the books, showing that they wrote from a certain standpoint to kind of express their.
We are a product of who we are. We're a product of all these things, and that's not CRT. That's just reality. That you're going to be who you are based on your family, where you're born, your experiences. All of that go into making our personalities, and so I would not give CRT credit for any of that. A theory borrows on a lot of stuff, and so it's a blend. Theories are blends, and so yeah.
But honestly, reading Kimberly Crenshaw's first essay, or the most popular essay that she had, I mean, that was kind of like one of
the intersectionality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is a part of intersectionality. That's the only thing I was.
But the problem is, is that it's like the way they use it is the more sources of disadvantage you can list, the greater credibility, authority your voice is supposed to have, and your voice can trump history, science, medicine, all these things. That is the part that's absurd. But it's not absurd that I, as a Black woman born in rural poverty, first generation college student, would have disadvantage, have to work harder. And when I got to Princeton, it wasn't just that I had to learn how to teach. I had to learn which fork to pick up. I had to learn which water glass was mine. I had to learn all the social skills. And there are things that, I still struggle with. Maybe you figured this out, but I didn't know that when you're emailing someone or you calling them and you don't get a response, that is the response. It means no. I had a dean explain that to me because I didn't know that if you were sending emails or something and the person didn't respond, that meant no. But I mean, because I would say no, I would respond, but within that culture, if they ignoring you, that means no.
You would think that that's a universal cue. You would think so anyway. But Dr. Swain, I know we have to go here. I want to see if I could slip in one final question.
Yes, one final question.
Thank you so much. again for this great conversation, episode 123. I'm sure it's going to turn some eyes and some heads at the same time, but I'm here for it.
It'll
Whatever. I'm
make
really
people
excited.
think. People need to think. They need to get out of their comfort zones and become uncomfortable, and you'll be okay.
No doubt. As far as because you made references to this in the book about reparations, I'm
Right.
curious, do you see attempts at reparations for African Americans as is that synonymous with affirmative action? And I just want to get like your take, your
That's
overall
a
take on reparations.
that's a long discussion. And while I was in academia, the reparations kept coming up, and that was fraught with so many problems because a large percentage of the blacks in America are people that came from the Caribbean, some of them and from Africa, certainly the ones that are in higher education and in business. And so they're not descendants of slaves. And so what are you going to do with them? How are you going to count them? They definitely want to be counted. So that was a problem. And then if you look at legal reparations, there's no live slaveholders or slaves. And so that poses a problem. And I would argue that ever since slavery ended, there have been white people trying to repair the effects of to repair the past and present effects of slavery. And right after the end of slavery, you may remember that with Booker T. Washington, he was given the money from white philanthropists to start Tuskegee Institute. And the Rosenwald Foundation paid for 5,000 schools to be built for Black students across the South. And there have been millions and billions, trillions poured into scholarships and programs to benefit Blacks. And so efforts at reparations have been an ongoing project, I would say. And I would also say that if monetary awards were given to every Black person in America, it would not end the problems and the disparities, because so much of it is moral. So much of it is about people's choices, how they live their lives. And I do believe that as Black people, that we need to own the crime problem in Black communities. We need to own the school problem in Black communities. And Black men need to stop having so many illegitimate babies that they walk away from and begin to take responsibility. And that was a problem, I would say, that was created by progressives, because if you look at the data coming out of slavery in 1950s, the Black marriage rate was very similar to the white marriage rate. This thing about the single parent households was a creation. And I would argue that it was a creation of the left.
Oh wow! So you had to end like that.
Well, now, to be continued.
Okay, but I tell you, I did really enjoy this conversation. I know we don't agree on a lot of stuff, but I definitely believe that my audience will get something from the conversation. And I will encourage my audience to get the book, The Diversity of Diversity. I'm going to put all the links in the episode description and just link all your books there so the audience, if they want to purchase those books, they can. But do you have a final word or two for my audience? And again, thanks for coming on to the
I
show.
would say that on those areas where you think we disagree, it just means we haven't had a conversation, because like, this is probably a bad thing for a Christian to say. It's not very humble, but I'm almost always right, and time proves me to be right.
You see, you're almost
And
right.
and I mentor a lot of people, and I have a lot of spiritual children that from every race, ethnicity, and all around the world. I think that younger people would do a lot better if they listened to older people like me. So that's my parting words.
Oh my gosh.
You can save yourself some grief. You don't have to learn everything the hard way.
Oh my gosh. I tell you what, okay, Dr. Carol Swain, I've enjoyed this conversation. We had some good laughs, some good conversations, some back and forth, and some agreement. I don't want to leave this conversation with people thinking that like what's going on, because honestly,
They're not going to stop listening to you if you tell them that you agree with me about 95% of the time. They'll stick around.
No, but I think a lot of my audience would concur. Your critique of the white liberal class is on point. We've been saying that for years now, and it's just some of the other stuff
They're
that
the
we.
biggest racists. Like when I can tell you that as someone who's
I
very
can see that
successful
for
in
sure.
academia, the most racist comments ever came out of the mouths of white people. And this, you can look this up. Francis Lawrence was the president of Rutgers University in the 1990s. I believe it was 1995. He was talking with faculty in a room that he thought was safe. And he said that it was that you shouldn't expect the same from a group that was genetically impaired. He was talking about Black people. He was a big affirmative action supporter. And he did not lose his job because Black people came to his defense. But I mean, how racist is that?
No, I mean it's definitely there, and it's almost like people use that logic, but then it's like they don't apply it to themselves. And I think your co-author made that point in the book about how the white privilege aspect doesn't apply to white liberals, even though they claim that. Like, no, I totally
Oh, and
understand.
when I mean, they have their exclusive white parties, and they and a lot of times Black people are just for their entertainment. And now I really do have to go. We can
Okay.
have other conversations, but hopefully your audience will be more enlightened, and they'll have things to think about, and they'll be better off after having listened to this podcast.
It's going to be interesting to see the reception of this episode. It will release today, and
All right.
I'll send a link out to you and everything. But thanks again for coming on the show, and take care of yourself, and we'll talk soon. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Bye. Okay.
Beautiful people. That was Dr. Carol Swain, episode 123. Quite provocative, and again, interesting book. Talks a lot about the DEI programs, and beautiful people. I'm going to give a book review for the next episode 124, and then we have a whole slate of guests coming on down the road. But enjoy the rest of your day, and cheers, beautiful people. Talk to you all soon.